Dimensions! They are pretty cool, and Barney, he's got all three of them. But what if we took one of those dimensions away from his little mitten hands? Pretty good segue, right? Barney may be known as a three-dimensional big purple dinosaur, but flattening him out for books, promotional materials, and other pieces of media has led to some of the cutest and strangest interpretations of him. His 2D self has been through a lot, and today we're gonna go through every Barney art style and see just how much our favorite dino has changed when stuck on a piece of paper. Speaking of piece of paper, you should hit the subscribe button. They can't all be good segues, right? Welcome to the Barney Desk. Before Barney became a cultural phenomenon, he was hopping around a soundstage in Texas with a bunch of wide-eyed kids. He was just an idea, a friendly dinosaur meant to teach toddlers through educational videos. And what's the first thing any self-respecting children's brand needs? A legally protected identity. Barney needed a trademarked image for branding. In the early days, two key pieces defined his 2D appearance. The first was a stylized version of the Barney and the Backyard Gang logo, introduced in 1988. This was a simple, black vector silhouette of Barney, designed as a recognizable brand marker. When colorized, it had no black stroke outlining it, instead relying entirely on color contrast to define Barney's shape. This worked well on colored backgrounds, but when placed on a white backdrop, which is, often the case, the lack of a clear outline kind of makes it look strange and a little incomplete. By 1990, this version was starting to be phased out in favor of a new standing Barney illustration, which would appear on the back of early Barney books and promotional material. This artwork traced off an image of the 1990 Barney's costume, but maintained the same flat vector-based style as the logo, with no black stroke and colorized versions. This version was officially trademarked in June 1991, but it had already been in circulation a year prior, appearing on posters, shirts, and other merchandise for Barney in concert. This isn't technically an art style per se, and more just legal mumbo jumbo that would appear on the tags of merchandise, but it is technically the first illustration of Barney, so it'd be kind of odd to not talk about it. The Backyard Gang logo illustration also does appear on the outfits of the kids in Waiting for Santa, so technically it can be considered an art style in that regard. Moving on from the trademark vector designs, we would get to something that actually resembles an art style. With the success of the first three Barney tapes, a series of books were released, giving young readers a way to experience Barney's adventures outside of VHS. These books, illustrated by Dave Kahn, Mike Fence, and Larry Fence, marked the first true attempt at translating Barney into a fully hand-drawn form. The general shape, posture, and facial structure mirror the costume surprisingly well, and you could tell the artist really tried to stay true to how Barney looked on screen. But something about these illustrations still feel off. If you stared at one of these pictures for too long and felt a vague sense of unease, it's probably the eyes. For some reason, they're a lot bigger and beadier here, making him look a little more vacant than he probably should. It's like he's peering directly into your soul, which is great for a horror adaptation, but maybe not so great for The Backyard Show. Outside of that though, these illustrations are actually really well done. The art is heavily shaded with deep black shadows and glossy airbrushed highlights that give Barney a rubbery, almost creature-like look. The shading technique adds depth and dimension, making him feel far more three-dimensional than many later illustrations. The human characters, by contrast, are more cartoonish with round faces, big eyes, and simple clean line work, lacking the heavy shading that Barney has. This contrast makes sense, Barney is the main focus after all, so the kids were likely simplified for easy illustration. Despite its quirks, this is one of the most detailed and stylized 2D interpretations of Barney ever. The airbrushed highlights and commitment to matching the costume made him feel almost like a weird, rubbery friend who crawled out of your TV. Paired with chunky line work and crayon textured lettering, it gave the Barney brand this cozy, homemade charm. Like he wasn't just for preschoolers, he was drawn by them. Speaking of resembling preschooler drawings, it's time to talk about the first official Barney coloring book. Oh my god. This art style looks traced from the general structure of the Backyard Gang book illustrations, but stripped down to something much cruder and more simplified. Gone were the deep shadows and glossy highlights. Instead, Barney was now reduced to a flat, unshaded shape. Unshaded shape. Wow, what a word. With thick, inconsistent line work. And when I say inconsistent, I mean it. Everything here looks like it was drawn in Sharpie in a few hours. Barney's limbs are widely inconsistent. His arms are constantly shifting in size and shape, and his fingers fluctuate between glove size to meaty crab claws. His pupils are still so big, and his eyelids are so far down. He looks so off. Every page here looks like a different artist had to draw him from memory with a marker. It's, oh my gosh, we're moving on. The next wave of Barney coloring books in 1991 tried to course correct from what came before, and to be fair, they did. The artwork was much more refined, evolving from the previous mess of thick lines and fluctuating anatomy into something much more polished and consistent. Barney's design was finally stable, his limbs flowed more naturally, and they finally fixed his eyes by making his pupils smaller and thinner. The kids were also slightly refined, blending better with Barney's updated look, and the overall style really reminds me of the classic Hanna-Barbera, with its round faces, expressive poses, and simple but charming line work. This design would be given a slight update in the Protect Our Earth coloring book, which used a shaded version of the same style and slightly different kid designs. This was really the last transitional design before things truly solidified, because in 1992, Barney really needed a standardized look. 1992 marked Barney's official jump from home video star to mainstream children's icon with Barney and Friends. With this shift came a fully standardized 2D art style under the Lions group. This version, often referred to as the Lion style or the Gen 1 style, built upon the Backyard Gang coloring book era, refining Barney's proportions while ensuring a more polished and expressive look. His face was rounder, his snout slightly shorter, his hands were now defined as mittens, and his eyelids were always low, like he just woke up from a nice nap. His body was soft and rounded with thick limbs that gave him a plush, huggable look. This design would never really get shaded, it kind of just stayed as black line work and then coloring. But I like that. I don't think shading would have worked with this simple design. His purple was also made brighter and more pinkish, locking in a color palette that would remain mostly unchanged throughout the 90s. While this was meant to be Barney's first truly consistent 2D look, some illustrations still ended up slightly off model, likely due to different artists interpreting the same guidelines in their own way. Even so, this art style dominated Barney's branding, appearing in Barney magazine, storybooks, and promotional materials, but its most iconic use was in both versions of the Barney Home Video logo. It was clear, recognizable, and built for mass production. This was the Barney illustration that most kids in the early 90s would see outside of the show, and would continue to be used until 1996. But in 1994, Barney's 2D design received a refinement that smoothed out his proportions and cleaned up his line work. This took the 1992 design and softened it, introducing subtle shading that was not present in the earlier style. His facial features saw slight adjustments, with his eyes being the only thing to remain the same. His snout was rounder, and his limbs were thick, but not overly exaggerated, striking a middle ground between the early 90s and, in retrospect, what was coming next. This style was used heavily in Barney books, promotional artwork, and media releases, such as the covers for Barney Live in New York City and Barney's Favorites Volume 2. But see, this style would get quickly overthrown by KABLAM! Now this is what I consider the definitive Barney art style. This little guy was everywhere, and I mean everywhere when I say everywhere. Books, promotional posters, toy packaging, you name it. If you had a Barney product in the late 90s to mid 2000s, this was the Barney you saw, and I honestly love it. By 1995, things were changing again, but not just in how Barney looked, but in how he was being drawn. Lyric Studios had began using early versions of Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop for their character art, allowing for much clearer line work and more consistent shading. But more than just a visual upgrade, this shift was a sign of how massive Barney had become. See, deadlines were becoming tighter, output had to scale globally, and traditional hand airbrush rendering just couldn't keep up. Cartoon art for kids brands around the time leaned heavily into a glossy airbrushed aesthetic. Characters were bold, shiny, and rendered with eye-catching gradients, while backgrounds stayed soft and watercolor-like to keep the focus forward. This style especially took off after Toy Story sold like yacht-cakes, and suddenly every company wanted their character to look like 3D models. But with full CGI out of the reach for most, the next best option was to have illustrators fake it by using painterly techniques to mimic that dimensional, plastic-like finish, and Barney was no exception. Behind the scenes, artists were racing to keep things consistent. Without access to digital models like companies use today, they relied on reference sheets, Polaroids of maquettes, which if you don't know, those are like models that are based off of the design, and pre-approved poses, usually drawn from the same few angles to speed up approvals from the big guys. That's why so many Barney illustrations from this era have that same pose and the exact same head. It wasn't laziness, it was logistics. All of that laid the groundwork for what would become the most polished Barney art style yet. It carried over the shading and rounder, chubbier proportions from the 1994-1996 style, but cranked up the polish to another level. The biggest change was the eyes. Gone were the larger, simple pupils. Now, Barney had smaller pupils and thin, subtle eyelids that gave him a much more refined, soft expression look. It was a small adjustment, but it made a huge difference, making Barney look less dead expression and more warm and inviting. And then there was the shading. Oh boy, the shading! This art style went all in on making Barney look beveled, airbrushed, and plastic. His body had a darker main colored stroke, a subtle soft highlight stroke, and a gradient that brightened in the middle, giving him that signature glossy balloon-like effect. This was by far the cleanest and most professional Barney illustration up to this point. This style was occasionally used alongside the 1994 to 1996 art, which I like to call the in-between era, with both appearing in Barney books, packaging, and promotional materials. Occasionally, you'd also see a pastel-colored version with disconnected purple stroke, which was a unique touch for some books. I like it. But this was the Barney art of the late 90s and early 2000s, and would go on to be used all the way until 2008, long after new styles were introduced. If that's not a testament to how quality these designs are, I don't know what is. Next up, Barney took a brief detour into realism. This style first appeared in 2003 as part of certain logos for the Barney's Colorful World Tour. Unlike previous Barney artwork that leaned heavily into stylization, this version stayed incredibly faithful to the promo suits used around this time. It had black line work and bright highlights seen in previous styles, but the shading itself was noticeably more subdued. This art style was not widely used, however, but it made an unexpected reappearance in 2009, years after it had seemingly vanished, on the cover of Barney's travel book used in season 13 of Barney and Friends. That's right, this very specific Barney design randomly popped up 6 years later, despite the show's branding having already moved on. Why? Who knows? Maybe someone at HIT really liked it. While this never became a main art style, it was an interesting little one-off experiment. It tried something different while still being visually appealing, and I appreciated it. I hope further styles will keep trying to strike this balance. Please go back. This version first showed up in 2005, mainly on birthday cards, cups, napkins, printouts, and while it was based on the late 90s art style, it looks like gout. No disrespect to my man Greg Harden, he makes great work, but this is, oh my gosh. Barney's head became a baseball. His arms were thicker than usual and his eyelids are just gone, making his expression feel oddly vacant at times. This design actually was used with the 1996 art style, but it didn't stick around for long because the year of our Lord was upon us. 2006, the year of lobotomies and Riff. With the HIT Entertainment brand overhaul came a complete redesign of Barney's 2D look. Here it is. This wasn't a bad design or anything, but it was a major shift from what came before. Gone were the deep shading and airbrushed highlights of the lyric era. Instead, Barney was now a flat, sticker-like cartoon with minimum depth, with the only attempt at shaving having no blending whatsoever. His arms were shortened to match the costume, his eyes were smaller, and his eyelids permanently tilted downwards. His mouth was now V-shaped, and his colors were brighter and more saturated. This version of Barney dominated the late 2000s, appearing in books, promotional ads, websites, merchandise, everything. The design was simple, inoffensive, and functional, while lacking some of the special sauce of the earlier designs. Around this time, Adobe Flash also became a key part of Barney's illustration workflow. The characters were turned into full-on puppet rigs, essentially digital paper dolls, which allowed for quicker, more consistent art across products. And while this was great for maintaining brand cohesion and being very simple to reproduce, it also contributed to the flatness of the visuals. That rich, painterly look from the 90s was all but gone. Barney had officially entered his vector era. As expected, this design wasn't universally loved. Many in the Barney community felt that the smaller eyes and tilted eyelids gave Barney a sad or tired look compared to his more lively past designs. While the changes weren't extreme, they were just different enough that some fans never fully warmed up to them. I personally like the art style, I grew up with it, and it's super nostalgic for me, but I get why some people weren't fans. It might not have had the charm and detail of the earlier styles, but it worked for the era. As the 2010s rolled in, a variation of this style reintroduced shinier shading, but this design wouldn't be the last we'd see of it. Further styles would continue to use this as a base in different ways, like 2013's Barney Outside style. This was a soft, storybook-like design that was an offshoot of the hit era Barney, created by Larissa Rodriguez for baby and toddler products. The black line work is gone, there's just no outer stroke. Instead, darker purples and blues defined his shape, including his mouth. This would have been fine if they didn't keep the black eyes. Why did they just not make them purple? The shading is soft and blended, like it was patted on with watercolors. This is Barney at his most baby-friendly. It's gentle and it's inoffensive, designed to look right at home on nursery walls with baby blankets. And honestly, it's cute, but it also kind of feels like Diet Barney. It lacks a little bit of that extra energy that makes the design really stick with you. These next few I'd like to classify as seen on a singular shirt design, but was indeed put into this universe, so if I have to suffer, so do you. Try putting that on a t-shirt. This 2016 JCPenney style shirt features Barney decked out in the most prankster gangster drip imaginable, grills, a tilted snapback, and a juice box because nothing screams street cred like staying hydrated. The art style is that weird, faux vintage crosshatched look you see on ironic graphic t-shirts. It's like those early 2000 gangster cartoon things, except without any of the commitment. There's no cigars or weapons or actual grit. And honestly, I can't decide if it would have been more or less cringe if they had gone all the way and slapped a Glock in his stubby little hands. But you know what isn't prankster gangster? Plagiarism. This isn't even original art. It's traced from a fan-made how to draw Barney guide, which itself was traced from this weird-looking, overused promo shot of Barney, meaning this is a bootleg of a bootleg and is officially licensed somehow. There's maybe a fun idea in here somewhere, but the execution is absolutely horrid. Moving on. Then we got this lovely shirt design based on the hit era art, attempting to replicate an anime art style. It's barely even a distinguished art style, it's just a piece of hit art with some flat gloss lines thrown on and the worst applied anime eyes ever. I call him Barney Gato. And now we arrive at our most recent stop on this journey, Mattel's take on Barney. I said Barney? Not some purple frog? Yeah. This style has technically been floating around since 2013, but it wasn't until 2023 that it started getting more exposure, thanks to various branding pushes and merch collaborations. First appearing in places like South African coloring books and the Barney website run by Blue Horizons, Mattel's South African reps at the time, this version of Barney keeps the proportions of the late 90s art while bringing in the flat minimal shading of the hit era. It's a fusion of styles, long limbs, flat color palette, and eyebrows. Yeah, for the first time in 2D Barney history, he has actual eyebrows, and honestly, they work. The addition of eyebrows helps in a way that Hit's ever-present sad eyelids didn't. It gives him a more normal and friendly expression, and occasionally, depending on the art, even makes it look like he's raising them in a funny, inquisitive way. What is he questioning? We may never know. Maybe why Hit gave him those depressing half-lidded eyes in the first place. He looks so devious here. What is he doing all that for? While this design has been mostly used alongside hit-style art, it finally got a spotlight in 2023 with the emotionally unavailable and financially unavailable collaboration. It featured this modernized Barney art alongside this one piece of very early 90s lion art. I'll never understand how these two exist in the same collection. I actually really like this design. It feels like the best version of the hit style. It keeps the simplicity but refrains it in a way that makes Barney feels more lively. And even though the Barney costume has short arms, I think he just looks better with longer limbs and artwork. I really hope this style gets used more because it's super charming. And clearly Mattel thinks so too. When they took over the brand as part of the larger Hit Entertainment portfolio, this design quietly became what's referred to internally as the classic version of Barney. This was the version that came with a fully digital toolkit designed for speed and consistency. It's the one licensees get when they want to slap Barney on a birthday banner or a baby shampoo bottle without having to redraw anything. From what I understand, this toolkit has been the most readily available for the few companies still interested in leasing out the Barney brand. With its cleaner assets, flexible poses, and vector-based build, it's tailored for today's more corporate, brand-safe landscape. It's cute, it's clean, and thanks to those little expressive eyebrows, it finally gives Barney something that the hit style never could: personality. You may have noticed that I neglected to mention the three little dinos throughout all of this, and that's because, well, they barely change. But let's do a quick lightning round anyway, because there are a few differences, mostly due to the art styles they were drawn in. Starting with Baby Bop, who probably had the most noticeable tweaks over time, she debuted in 1991 with her Barney in Concert era ribbon art, which, just like the Barney Backyard Gang ribbon art, was traced from some image of her costume. The line art is weirdly thick here, somehow looking even more amateurish than the standing Barney art. I've never been a fan of early Baby Bop. I don't like how tall she is. It kind of freaks me out. A baby character should not be the same height as Barney. But thankfully, she got shrunk down in the lion style, making her a little more rounded and cute. Then, in the in-between style, her eyelashes changed from long, thick, rectangular shapes to just 3 thin, short lines. And basically, that's how she kind of stayed, all the way through the Hit and Mattel styles, just with the shading and usual Mattel eye tweaks. Moving on to BJ, who skipped the early 90s altogether since he didn't debut until 1993. His first illustrated appearance was in the in-between style, and wow, does it reflect his early costume design. His face is super flattened and scrunched, but he's also got those giant pupils characteristic of this art style. Over time, his crest became a little smaller and more curved, and then he was given completely different thin eyes, much sharper than Barney and Baby Bop's rounder ones. His face and snout also had much more projection, much like his actual costume. BJ kept this look for a long time, up until the Hit era where he got a slight shrinkening, yes that's a word now. His crest got a little bit smaller and his eyes became round to match the others. His pupils also tended to be weirdly tiny, making him look kinda scared. And honestly, I would be too after surviving those Hit Entertainment years. Heyo! Mattel really could have fixed these, but I digress. And finally, we have my beloved little orange guy. Because Riff debuted in 2006, the Hit art style is all he's ever known. But honestly, I think Riff translates into 2D way better than the other two. He looks the most like his costume in the Hit art style. He looks good! Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes he's rocking this Springtrap FNAF 3 Extras menu render. He looks a little silly. Sometimes his arms look a little too thin. It really depends on the artwork. Now, unfortunately, Mattel has yet to acknowledge my poor guy's existence in their Barney brand revitalization, so he doesn't have a modern illustration in the Mattel style. He's just missing, forgotten, ignored. He doesn't deserve that. So I took matters into my own hands and made one for him. It's not technically official, but we can pretend. We can tape that picture up on the Barney Wiki article. Speaking of the Barney Wiki, just so happens there's a new page cataloging Barney's 2D art style throughout the years. It's a really beautiful, well-organized, in-depth resource. Guys, it was me. I made the page while working on this video. You should go check it out. And there you have it. Barney's 2D journey has been a roller coaster. From hyper-detailed book illustrations to corporate-approved sticker Barney, from some of the most charming cartoon renditions to, you know, whatever that coloring book was. But through it all, they all tell the story of how Barney evolved alongside the brand, reflecting different eras of children's media, marketing trends, and occasionally, what happens when a designer gets way too into airbrushing. I think what's fascinating about all of this is that despite so many shifts in style, Barney's design never completely lost his identity. Whether he was a glossy balloon, a softly shaded storybook, or a bizarre baseball-headed creature, you could always tell it was Barney. And honestly, I love that. It's fun to see how different artists interpreted him over the years, and I hope we keep getting more styles in the future, because if Mattel ever decides to fully embrace 2D Barney again, I'm just saying, we could be one good design choice away from the best Barney artwork yet. Huge thanks to my friend, Will Willie, for creating some of the artwork you see in this video. He painstakingly recreated the art style and his work is fantastic. Please, oh my gosh, send him so many thanks. He's a living legend. Please let me know down below what your favorite Barney art style is and why. While you're down there, you should also hit the subscribe button because we make a lot of fun content on this channel. And sometimes we stop making Barney theme song videos. What can I say? We like the theme song over here at Barney Desk. Anyway, thanks for watching.